Hi, this is Barbara Lamprecht. I'm the author of Richard Neutra Complete Works, and you are listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world.
This is the third year U.S. Modernist Radio has been part of the Architecture and Design Film Festival in New York. Every fall, the stars, producers, and creators gather together to premiere their latest documentaries. ADFF Executive Director Kyle Bergman curates visually wonderful, thought-provoking, and faithfully documented films that capture the brilliance of their architects, artists, and significant buildings. As you surely recall, last year at this very film festival's main theater, I discovered Doritos popcorn, which is up there at the same delirious level as the Popeye's chicken sandwich. Deceptively simple. The recipe is A, make popcorn, B, coat popcorn liberally in addictive orange Doritos dust.
Got it.
And C, give customers lots of napkins.
Yeah.
But this year, I held back the Doritos to save room for dinner at a Japanese-Peruvian fusion restaurant called Sen Sakana in New York. I had the best sushi and sake of my life and have been again several times for their Nikkei cuisine, a blend of Japanese and Peruvian based on immigrant Japanese who settled in Peru in the late 1800s. I can't wait to see what food experience awaits me next year. Coming up, my conversations with two of the filmmakers at this year's festival, Lene Borch Hansen of the movie The Man and the Architect, Jørn Utzon, and Britni Harris of the movie Goff. Support for U.S. Modernist Radio comes from Nichiha.com/USModernist and modernist realtor Angela Roll.
Durability, designed to last for years to come, bringing you peace and tranquility. You feel relaxed, knowing your house can easily achieve any exterior look and any color. Wood, concrete. Your house loves feeling this good, and you love feeling this good. Nichiha, Nichiha. Nichiha, Nichiha. Say it with me. Nichiha. Advanced engineering. Nichiha, Nichiha. Durability, textures, finishes, and colors. Visit Nichiha.com/USModernist. Nichiha, Nichiha. Nichiha. That's N. C H I H. Wait for it. A look you'll love. Nichiha.
Lene Borch Hansen is a Danish director specializing in international documentaries about world-famous Danes. This year's entry at the festival, The Man and the Architect, Jørn Utzon, tells the emotional story about the world-renowned architect of the Sydney Opera House and his struggles with an Australian government that both celebrated and brutally rejected him.
Boo.
Jørn Utzon was married 66 years, and Lene Borch Hansen documents not only Utzon's amazing projects, but his incredibly loving relationship. We go now to George and Lene in New York.
You're from Denmark, right?
I am.
And I'm a huge fan of Danish television, which you probably take for granted. But I remember the series Borgen, which was on about 10 years ago.
Yes, I saw that too. It's wonderful.
Incredible series about politics.
Yep.
And then you had The Bridge, which was Brunn?
Brunn.
Yes. Teach me a little language here. And then, let's see, there was The Killing.
Yes.
Right. And that was a different, how do you say it in Danish?
I forgot the Danish title. I forget the name, but that's very famous. Yeah. She's wonderful. I love her. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the whole quality of Danish television was just so different.
Yeah, we've done well in the drama.
Even in the crime shows, even like in the Bridge, there's not car chases or people shooting at each other. There's lots of character development in it. It's really incredible.
Nordic noir.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm a fan. I haven't heard of any new series lately. Do you know what's on Danish TV right now?
The latest one would be, what's it called in English? But that's actually very untraditional because it takes place in a family where the father is a priest. And one of the sons is a priest, and the other son is kind of the lost son who has also studied to be a priest, but then left. Yeah. So that's kind of an unusual approach to have a drama series take place in the home of the priest.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also what's great about Danish TV is your seasons, your series are much shorter than in the U.S. You go usually 10 or 12 episodes.
Yeah, max.
And then you have to wait another year or 6 months to find out what happens next.
Yes.
Over here, we're shooting 20, 30, 35 episodes in a season that can sometimes be too much.
Yeah, I think we're probably very fortunate as to the fact that we also don't have that many channels. Mm-hmm. And we have 2 or 3 channels that really push for the drama and has the ability. We're a small language area, so of course we can't produce as much as you do in the US.
Yeah.
And we also have Netflix and HBO.
Oh, yes. How long have you been in Denmark?
Always.
Always?
Yes.
That's where you grew up?
Yeah, I grew up in Denmark.
Okay, where?
I grew up in what's called Jutland.
Okay.
Yes, then I got my first job, which was in television on Funen, and now I live in Copenhagen.
Oh, nice.
I've been in Copenhagen for, I think, 25 years.
One of my favorite cities to visit.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah.
I live there, yeah.
It was at the Øresund area.
Yes.
Just south of Copenhagen, right? Beautiful.
Yeah.
Where the train line goes through, it's like just a perfectly planned.
It's a magical little place, I think.
Yeah.
Every time I travel a lot, and I love traveling. I love coming to New York. Every time I'm here, I feel it's the best place. But I really love where I live because there's the change of the seasons. We have a tiny country, 5 million people. We're quite privileged.
One of the happiest nations on earth, right?
That's what they say. Yes.
And what is the word? It starts with an H.
Hygge.
Hygge.
Yes.
Tell our listeners what that means.
Well, they always say you can't translate it, but it is kind of, you're together with your family, you're joking, having a good meal, eating together, cozy. I think cozy would be the translation, but doesn't really tell. It's kind of a feeling more, and it's to do with people being together and enjoying being together.
Maybe the U.S. equivalent is chilling out.
Probably,
We're chilling out with.
Yeah.
Is it hygge? Hygge. Yeah. Okay. Well, we could talk about Denmark all day, but we're going to talk about Jørn Utzon, the man, the architect, your film.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask before we get into his big building, what were some of the other buildings that he did during his career that people might not know about?
Definitely, we have a church in Denmark. It's called the Bagsværd Church. It's 25 minutes north of Copenhagen, which is a place where architects from all over the world travel to see and experience. And it's always open. And when I started making the film, I don't know anything about architecture. Now I know something about Jørn Utzon. Mm-hmm. But when you go to the church, it's 100% Utzon design. You can't really say that about the Sydney Opera House, probably 50-50. But everything there is designed according to Jørn Utzon. Every little detail, every doorknob, everything. And when you are in the church, you feel how wonderful it is to be in that. And as one of the architects in the film describes, you don't have to know anything about architecture to feel it.
It's just there.
It's just there, and it's a beautiful light, and how he somehow magically transformed the lights into the church. And this is what he do. It's he's very brilliant about that. And so you feel the whole thing when you're in there, and the acoustics are amazing. And so it's just really, really wonderful just to be there. And everybody can feel that.
Did he do projects outside of Denmark?
Yes, he also did the Kuwait National Assembly building, which he did after, which is a huge build after the Sydney Opera House. And then, of course, he did 2 houses in Mallorca, which are very interesting and beautiful. He built one. It's called Ken Liss, House of Liss, and his wife's name was Liss.
And they were married a long, long time.
66 years. Yes, that was a very solid marriage and love relationship. And so they built that on the cliff in Mallorca, and rises 20 meters above sea level on a cliff. And the houses are put like little cubes on the side, so it sort of follows the cliff's shape. And I was fortunate to live there for a month while making the film.
That's a great benefit of being the film producer,
yes,
right?
Which was, a very huge experience to live his architecture. At the time, I knew quite a bit of what he'd done and what he'd built, but it was quite interesting to live there and go and explore every little detail. And you'll see the house in the film, and it's a very nice yard. And you could sort of say, oh, no, I have to move over here because the sun changes. And, of course, he made a little bench there. So, that was kind of very cool. Stays in my heart forever. It's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Let's go back to, I guess it would be the early 60s, when there's an international competition to design the Sydney Opera House with a blue ribbon panel of architects, I think, including Eero Saarinen.
Yes, he was a lead judge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Why did they want to build an opera house?
They had a very foresightful prime minister, Joseph Cahill. And in Australia at the time, there were no buildings of that kind. And he said they had the bridge, of course, and then they had a lot of gambling. And he thought that his people also should have a house of culture where they could enjoy theater, ballet, and symphony music, because Australia didn't have that at the time. And I also think it could only have happened in Australia. So he was very foresightful, and it was also very unusual to have a committee of 4 judges that were all architects. I think it was in 57, the competition.
Okay. Yes.
He won the competition by the end of 57. And Eero Saarinen, the myth goes that he came a little late, and then he said, which designs have you discarded? And Utzon's wasn't really very, it's kind of sketchy, not very produced.
Well developed.
It developed, yes. Yes. But he turned it around, and it was kind of a sculpture and not looking like most of the other designs. Also, I think that because Saarinen was working on the JFK airport at the time.
Yes, the TWA building.
Yes, TWA building. And he was working with the organic forms. So I guess that maybe that caught his interest. I don't know. And the myth goes that he said this when they took it out of the bin, kind of. And he said, this is the winning design. And he actually helped make more drawings.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Now, most people don't realize that the Sydney Opera House is not just an opera house. Those shells represent different performing arts centers, and I think one of them is a restaurant, right?
Yeah. It's very different today from the original plan, but they wanted to build 2 halls. One was a concert hall that was supposed to be for opera and for the symphony. And then the other was for the ballet.
Okay.
If I remember correct. And then afterwards, it all changed. After Utzon got kicked out of Australia, and they took him off as an architect.
Well, wait a second. We'll get to that in a second. But how old was Utzon when he won the commission?
He was 38.
Okay.
And, he was working from his garage in Denmark, and nobody knew who he was. And bam, the next day, pretty much, he was world famous for winning the competition.
Yes. Yeah. So he started work. And then what happened? There were some governmental changes, administrations.
Yeah, so he started work in Denmark, and actually that prime minister, who was very foresightful, he said, we have to start right away. And Utzon and the engineer said, we can't do that. We don't know how it's going to be built. We have to start, because if we don't start, it won't happen. So they actually started building the podium before they ever knew how to build it. And of course, they had to change that and made some mess. And then after 3 years, Utzon and his family immigrates to Australia to build their life there. And they start the construction of the shells. And all goes fine for 8 years about. And then, as it always is, politics, there's an election and you have the country party who thinks the opera house is a mess. They want to clean it up. And, they're not really that interested maybe in having it. And they go to the election of cleaning up the opera house mess. And there really isn't a mess. But
they just don't like all the money that has been spent on it.
Yeah, and there was spent a lot of money because nobody had ever built a building like that before. So it was expensive, but the thing was it was financed by a lottery. The Australian at the time, they were big gamblers. So they had this lottery and they actually ended up paying for the whole thing, including all you see today.
Really? I did not know that.
Yes. And when Utzon left, the shell constructions were finished. You kind of only needed to finish the last stage, which were the glass windows and the interior of the halls. And by that time, only 1/5 of the budget was spent by Utzon.
Well, why did they kick him out?
Well,
because it sounded like he was going great.
Yes, he was, and he had the great client, but then the client changed it, and it's like politics, And I think there was also a kind of thing, why do we need a foreigner to build our opera house? We have architects that can do it as well. So, and then he was unfortunate that the engineering company that had worked with him through all the years, they went behind his back with a report that said that it couldn't be built, the interior halls, and which was also not true. And
yes,
so
we have an American expression for that. It's called throwing someone under the bus.
Exactly. They stabbed him in the back, threw him under the bus. And also he did not receive support from the Architects Association. He had a lot of young architects supporting him, and Harry Seidler supported him. Yeah, he went in the press and fought for him because Utzon never went in the press. He didn't understand, I guess he didn't understand the public relation thing.
The role of the media.
Yes, exactly. And nobody in the studio thought that they would kick them out because they were the only ones who could build it. And when he left, he still thought, 2 years later, he still thought he'd come back.
Who completed the opera house?
I think about 75 architects.
75?
They hired like 4, Peter Hall, and I forget the names now, but because I haven't really, I don't spend any time talking about that in the film. So,
yes.
But Australian architects. And they sort of split up. And then also they changed the scheme for the big concert hall. That was supposed to be both for the opera and for the symphony. And the sound have different times of traveling. So they made these brilliant plywood walls that could move. And they worked with an Australian plywood manufacturer out there. And the best acoustics from Kramer and Gabel from Europe. And they took Utzon to, I think it was the Scala, some opera house they had just built. And they put him on the best seat in the house and said, this is going to be the worst seat in the Sydney Opera House. But then unfortunately they changed the scheme and they didn't want the opera in the big hall. So today you actually can't perform opera. It's put in the small hall, which also means you can't perform like a Wagner opera. So you can't really do an opera, one of the grand operas in the Sydney Opera House.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, as I recall, the Sydney Opera House opened to great fanfare in the early 70s, and Queen Elizabeth flew there to open it up.
Yeah.
Was that around the time of like Helen Reddy and Olivia Newton-John, or did they come later?
Oh, I have actually no idea.
Famous Australian singers. I think they would be there.
Probably they were.
Okay.
Utzon wasn't there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Utzon missed out totally.
Yeah.
He was still out.
He never came back.
At all, ever?
No, he never saw it finished.
I had heard that at some point the government wanted him to come back and do some additional work.
Yes.
And how did that work out?
That was 20 years later, and he was around 80. So, he was too old to travel. It's too late, and you can say that the children of the people who kicked him out sort of invited him back because when we do work, let's do it according to how your original thoughts were. And he made the manual. And then he said his son, Jan, who's also an architect, and they worked together for decades. So he became the one to convey all the changes and what they did afterwards. He's been to Australia like 40 times since.
Oh, so the son went as the emissary.
So he was sort of, yes. And also Utzon's daughter, Lene, worked a little bit. There's a beautiful tapestry in the Utzon room, which Jørn Utzon designed as the first thing. It's completely, as it's a small chamber music room. Okay. And he designed that, and he designed a tapestry for the wall, and Lene oversaw the work in Australia.
One of the things that I really liked about learning about you is your persistence. So tell us about how you convinced the Sydney Opera House, the Australian government, and I also believe the aviation authority in Australia to let you fly drone cameras over the Opera House.
Yes, you just have to ask a lot of times. I knew we were going to do the film, so I was lucky. We planned a personal holiday for 25 years. And so we went to Australia in 2016 with my husband. And then I had the first meeting with the great guy in the Opera House, Brooke Turner, and just telling him about the project. And, the Opera House, they have people like me coming every day, maybe two, and saying, hey, we want to do a documentary about this and that. And we were fortunate that he thought it was a great project, and it was a different angle that had been seen before. And then I said to him, we really have to drone the house, the building, because that's the way to experience it. And it's definitely in the Utzon, in his...
genre, in his...
That's how he would love to see it.
The viewpoint he would like to see it.
Yeah. And it's the outside, it's the beautiful shells, and as many don't see, you don't have any stage tower, you don't have any pipes or anything. It's all covered in the shells. It's very brilliant.
Yes.
I'll tell you about the idea of that later. But then, and I said to him, we do have to do it with the drone camera because it's kind of the crown jewel of all the houses. We've done it with all the other houses. And he said, oh, no, Lene, that's not going to happen. And then I bugged him for about 14 months over the email and had some other people help me write the directors and tell them what a great idea it would be. And, you can have all the shots afterward. Maybe you can use them for that. And then they said, all right, then.
So why were they so opposed to it?
Because you have to clear the whole podium for the public. And it's actually quite difficult because it's open and there's always a lot of people around the Opera House.
So they're just afraid that the drone is going to crash and hurt somebody. That was the objection.
Yeah. So it's kind of fair enough.
Yeah.
But then we did the recordings very early morning, and then I called the aviation authorities and said, you know what? The Opera House let me film the house with the drone, and they say, well, good for you, but they don't own the airspace, and that's restricted. You can only fly with water planes and rescue helicopters. So not going to happen. And then I said, let's go back a little bit. How do we go about this? And then we hired a local crew who had all the permits and all the stuff and were very capable. And then after, I think, 16 months... We went to Australia and we had 2 mornings. So
to close off, it's a peninsula, really. It's an area.
Yes, it is.
Very large. I've been there.
Yeah, it's magnificent.
There's a tour you can get at 7 a.m, a behind the scenes tour of the Opera House, which I recommend to anybody who is going to travel.
I do too.
All that way. And it was fascinating because we got to go into the theaters and stand on the stage and talk out into the audience. You could hear the acoustics from the stage. We got to go through the dressing rooms and the performer areas in the back. And speaking of Olivia Newton-John, she was performing there.
Oh, cool.
The night that we were there. And for some reason, the tour guides took us into her dressing room. And there's all her stuff just lying around. And we're supposed to be very calm about this. We didn't get to meet her, but it was a great tour.
Very relaxed and laid back. I love them.
Yes.
It's a great place.
It was a terrific experience. And by 9:30 in the morning, they're shuffling you out because they're getting ready for their productions crews that are coming in.
It's a crazy house. It's amazing. They have like 800 shows a year in all. Now they have like 12 theaters there, small and large. So it's quite amazing. And Utzon, when he thought about it, because that peninsula is kind of a difficult place to put the building, and he sort of thought it all. He bought naval maps, and he could see that, and he was a sailor, so he knew them, and he could see that the city was a little bit elevated. So you would walk down from the city, you would run down towards the peninsula, and then even the acoustics were thought out. So you had all that noise from the city, and then you come down, and then you walk up the steps, kind of like the Mayan ruins in Mexico. So you walk up the steps because now something grand is going to happen. And then the brilliant thing was he turned the theaters around. So he made people go all along the sides of the theater, and then you come into the concert hall. And then all the big stuff would happen, and you would have the perfect acoustics there. And then you have the problem with the intermission, which sort of breaks that experience you're in the middle of. But then he took them to the harbor side, which is where they have the breaks for the intermissions, and you stand watching out on the harbor, that beautiful harbor, and then back in the room, and vice versa back in the city. It's very brilliant.
It is very brilliant.
Yeah.
Now, did the Australian government ever try to make it up to Utzon with some sort of knighthood or award or anything like that later on?
Yes. I think they've made a lot of amends since then. And as you talked about, they called him like 20 years later, and can you do this? And they also wanted to give him a statue, but he was not a man of receiving prizes and statues. So he asked that the spherical solution, the geometry from which the shells are designed, that is on the steps of the Opera House. So he asked for that instead of the bust of himself.
Okay.
And he also got some medals. He's got quite a few medals.
And when did he pass away?
He passed away in 2008.
In 8, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, we did the film like to be ready for 2018, which was centenary for his birth.
Right, yes.
Yes.
His wife, I assume, has passed away too?
Yes.
So he has one daughter?
One daughter and 2 sons.
And 2 sons. And are they back in Denmark or are they in Australia?
Yes, they're back in Denmark. His daughter, Lene, has lived quite a few years in Australia, and her son lives there now.
Okay.
Yeah, so they're, yeah. And Jan is in the house that his father built in Denmark.
What did you learn about Jørn the man in your research and in the film?
What surprised me the most is we always have the approach of telling the story through the human being. So this is not a film about architecture. It's a film about Jørn Utzon, but through getting to know him as a human being, you will also get to know his architecture. And in the case of Jørn Utzon, his architecture are extremely closely tied with that human being he was and his humanistic point of view of the world and how you live in it. But when I would talk to all these people that have met him and worked with him, I was very surprised that they all said that meeting him or working with him had changed their path of life. This is not often. I've done quite a few of these documentaries, and it's often guys that are not very nice to either their family or co-workers or whatever, but he's just plain really, really nice. And to change people's lives in very serious ways, that's quite amazing, because he was a very humble person. But because he was so humid and humble, and of course a brilliant architect, that inspired them very much. And they all these guys would talk about the love they have for Utzon, which is also not usual for men talking about love.
Not for superstar architects either.
Right.
I mean, I've interviewed a number of children of these very famous people, and they weren't great fathers.
Right. He was.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. And so it actually turned out to be a much bigger story about love. Actually, a love story. I didn't know that his marriage was very solid, and that love that he and Liz had for each other was the most important thing, you can say. It turned out to be a story about love, and I thought that was pretty amazing. Because as we know, love conquers everything. All you need is love. All you need is love. So, and I guess also...
That's John, Paul, George, Ringo, and Jørn.
Yes. And as we know, love conquers everything. Mm-hmm. And also the biggest blows in life. And I must say, he did suffer quite a few of those.
The film is Jørn Utzon, The Man and the Architect. Is there a website for the film? People can see a trailer, learn more about it?
No.
No, not yet?
There is I have a Facebook page that's called The Man and the Architect.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have a website yet.
Well, stay tuned. We'll have more information about that. Thank you so much, Lene, for coming by and,
Thank you
and
for
saying
having
hello.
me.
Been a pleasure.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you very much.
Coming up, George talks with Britni Harris of the movie Goff. But first, in an adventure we are largely making up, modernist realtor Angela Roll dated Harry Potter at age 17 as she attended Le Corbusier High School, just down the road from Hogwarts. They never played each other in soccer, but their proms were legendary, particularly the year they did Stairway to Heaven. Although ridiculed by other architecture students for dating a magician, she learned how to conjure up the slightly tipsy ghost of Mies van der Rohe, and she aced all the exams. Now she specializes in modernist houses and uses her architecture training, which is a real thing, unlike magic, to advise buyers and sellers on the best strategies for preserving the architecture they love, and what dress to wear to a Hogwarts prom. Hint, not an invisibility cloak. Angela Roll is your special agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com. That's ROEHL or 919-995-0550.
Bruce Goff was one of the greatest and unrecognized American architects of the 20th century. His unconventional perspective, and for that time his lifestyle, challenged Midwest traditions in ways that excited, disappointed, and polarized community opinion. Goff had a profound influence on generations of architects, including Philip Johnson and Frank Gehry. And producer-director Britni Harris has spent the last 5 years working on the documentary Goff. The movie explores the up-and-down events that led to the renewed interest of Bruce Goff's memory and houses. We go now to my talk with Britni in New York. I first want to find out about Pioneer Woman.
Oh,
because
yeah.
I somehow I missed that in the range of shows. What was Pioneer Woman about?
So, Pioneer Woman was the job that I got right out of college. It's for the Food Network, and it's in the middle of nowhere, Pawhuska, Oklahoma. And she lives on thousands of acres of vacant land in Pawhuska, full of cattle and wild Mustangs. And so I worked there for almost a year as a production assistant and a field camera, just learning how to live out in the wild, wild west, or the prairie, I guess.
So this was one woman living on the prairie?
Yeah, so she lives there with her family, and it's the Drummond family. Mm-hmm. And they've had like a cattle business out there for a long, long time. And so she married him and moved out there and just started a blog, and then, a TV show, and then a multi-million-dollar company.
Well, I mean, is on the Food Network?
Yeah.
What do you watch her cook? Is it a food show?
Yeah, so it is a food show. So she cooks for her family or for people in town. And so, yeah, it's a basic food show.
Okay. So what were some of the interesting things that she did out there on the prairie?
We were put through so much, even though it was just a food show. So I learned how to change tires on gravel roads, and we would go out into the fields at 4 a.m. when Lad was bringing in the cattle or feeding the cattle. And so it's just a lot of early mornings and lots of exploring the land and the animals.
But what about the food? I mean, was there something special she made, or with like roasting it over a fire pit, or?
No, I mean, it's just, I think it's like good old Oklahoma country cooking, not really healthy, but satisfying.
Yeah, all those nice carbs and fried things.
Exactly. I think she's tried to get healthier over the years, but I think that's like her go-to is just classic Oklahoma cooking. Classic.
And then there was Winnebago Man. What was that about?
Yeah, so I worked on Winnebago Man when I was in, I think it was in between high school and college. That was kind of my introduction into the documentary world. Winnebago Man is a documentary about this man, I think it's Jack Rebney, who did Winnebago commercials back in the day, and someone uploaded them to YouTube, and it's a bunch of outtakes of him cursing, basically, and just putting on a show. And then he became this like viral star when that was kind of at its very beginning on YouTube, and didn't want anything to do with it and kind of became a recluse and went away. And so the story is Ben Steinbauer, who's the director, is trying to find this man. So it's his like journey to find the man behind the videos. Yeah.
Okay. So he's like roaming around the country trying to find Winnebago Man?
Yeah, because I mean, he's gone off the grid. He doesn't want to do anything with any kind of publicity. But then Ben does a great job at becoming his friend and getting to know him.
Finding him.
Yeah.
There was a famous article, I guess, 20 years ago, searching for Bobby Fischer, the chess champion.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Before he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And they were trying to run him down, I guess. And I guess he was in New York City hiding out.
Of course.
Someplace, you know. Easy place to hide out, right? So from one interesting show to another, you decided to take on the architect Bruce Goff.
Yeah.
And that involved a little roaming around.
It did. He was not the easiest to find, especially archive or just people that knew him. He was kind of this hidden gem from Oklahoma that no one had really uncovered or looked at his story fully. I mean, there's been a documentary by the BBC about him, but it wasn't really about his life. It was more about his work. And so I was really fascinated to find out who was this man behind these incredible designs that I've never seen anything like.
He was pretty incredible.
He was.
And I want to find out more about him, but the first thing I thought of was animators called Sid and Marty Krofft. You ever heard of them?
Mm-mm.
They did H.R. Puffin stuff and things like that during the 70s, and their creations, I remember reading, were often very similar to Goff, the kind of wild structures and fantasies and characters and things like that. So tell us about how Goff got into design and his unconventional career path.
Yeah, I mean, he started at a very young age. He started around 12. He was drawing all the time at home, and his parents were like, well, we need to put this to some good use. And so they signed him up at Rush into Cotton Rush, which was a local architecture firm in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So he began there with just drawings. He ran across Frank Lloyd Wright, found a great inspiration from him. But then as that began, his career began, he decided to kind of veer away from the path of Frank Lloyd Wright and discover his own ways of thought and design. So he lived in Tulsa for quite some time, working there, and then moved to Chicago, where he worked with Iannelli and worked at a school there. And that's kind of how it all began in Tulsa.
Isn't that unusual for someone who falls in love with Wright to sort of fall out and go their own way?
Yeah, I think that it's Goff and Wright have a fascinating relationship because they were close and they didn't know each other well. And they actually have the same birthday, which I really love. But I think that Goff always recognized that, you know, many people were following Wright and kind of mimicking his designs. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted to be his own creative, his own architect. Which was a battle throughout his career, you know, with Wright as he tried to veer off from the path that Wright was on, especially with the Joe Price studio where he designed this out of this world design, and Wright, you know, scolded him for pushing the limits and creating something beyond what was acceptable.
How did Goff get back to Oklahoma to start teaching?
Yeah, so he was in the Navy and then was kind of hanging out in Berkeley, California for a while and got contacted by someone from the University of Oklahoma for an interview. And so he went down there and people were talking about, you know, these amazing designs that were in Tulsa, such as the Tulsa Club, which is something that Goff designed when he was very young. And so eventually he just felt like this was a good fit for him because he loved teaching, loved to expand his mind in architecture. But, you know, Oklahoma was always home for him. So I think it was the perfect fit.
Well, was Tulsa a pretty progressive town at that point?
It wasn't.
Were they into this?
I mean, I feel like there were a select few in Norman. Norman has always kind of been more of a progressive and artistic town because it has the campus. But Oklahoma in general during, the 40s and 50s was a very, very conservative place. One which probably Bruce Goff did not totally fit into. But for some reason, he always came back to the Midwest where he loved to be and to design. And so it wasn't the most comfortable place for Goff to live.
For a number of reasons, which
For
we'll
a
get
number
to.
of reasons, yeah.
So he was appointed to the faculty in Norman without a college degree.
Correct.
How did that happen?
I think it's just pure luck and just general charisma that Goff had. And he was a visionary, he wanted to expand teaching and education beyond the basics that had been taught before. He wanted to think outside the box and take his students with him.
But, that almost never happens. It's like getting magically knighted by the queen when you don't expect it coming.
Yeah, I think I would just try to think if I were in that situation, if I met Goff, and just to be in his presence and to see his visions and where he wanted to take architecture, I think you can't pass that by, especially if you're trying to take your architecture program to a different level.
Well, how did the faculty react to this?
I think that, the majority of the faculty were pleased, but there were some faculty that did not like the thoughts and ideas that Bruce Goff was bringing to the table. So, there were some followers of Goff at OU, but there definitely were some people that were against his ideas.
OU at the time was still primarily a Beaux-Arts kind of education. It had this little cell of modernists led up by Henry Kemp-Hefner, who eventually went to NC State to head up that school. And then you had Goff, who was in his own universe, really.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it is really amazing.
And then he became head of the department. How'd that happen?
I think it just was a matter of time, and people just loved the way that he was taking the school and thought that it was time to promote him. And that was great because he was able to appoint faculty and kind of create the program that he wanted to create. And so it just expanded upon the ideas that he first introduced when he was interviewed, I think.
So what does a Bruce Goff curriculum look like? How is it different than what a typical architecture student might experience at a university?
Yeah, I think it's way more abstract and experimental. They played a lot with point line plane. I know that was kind of the basics moving forward, and then you kind of expanded upon it. He also believed in the incorporation of music into architecture, so you could think outside of these forms and lines and think freely. I'm not an architecture expert, but...
funny, I'm not either.
But I think that he was thinking in all of these different forms and spaces beyond just architecture. He believed that architecture wasn't just one art, that it was an involvement of all of these different forms of art into one, and that you should explore music and painting and bring that into your designs.
Something he shared with Frank Lloyd Wright and Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and the Bauhaus people. All were looking at this as a much greater universe than just architecture by itself.
Absolutely.
When you became head of the department, how did things go?
Things were great as terms of what I've heard from students. They loved what was happening. And, people from all over the country were actually flocking to OU because it had gotten this reputation.
This is now mid-50s, roughly?
Yeah, about, I would say, 52, 53.
So Kemp-Hefner left in 48 and started his school at NC State. So Goff was in his prime now.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Oh, the unspeakable. It's a tough subject to talk about because... I've interviewed several of his students, and it was always a tough subject to talk about because nothing is totally, concrete in terms of what actually happened.
In your movie, I know there's a scene where the guy goes, "Do you really want to hear about it?"
Yeah, that was the barrier that I faced with this movie was this instance. So basically what happened was, or hearsay of what happened was, so Goff was gay. He didn't openly talk about it, obviously, but there were signs. He wore very unusual clothes for the time. He always hung out with all of the students, younger men. And so there were a lot of rumors around his intentions. And so apparently one evening, a juvenile delinquent, as they say, was sent.
Wow, that's an old term.
It is. Yes, it is a very old term. Was sent into Goff's either her office or house with some sort of powder on him so that he could prove that Goff had touched him. And so when the kid emerged, he had the fluorescent touchings or handprints on him.
Well, this sounds like CSI kind of stuff, but this was in the 50s.
Yeah, it's kind of a peculiar situation how it all went down, but that's how it was reported in all the newspapers. And so Goff was actually asked to leave the University of Oklahoma. The dean at the time supported him and wanted him to stay, but he thought that it was best for him to leave because he didn't want to deal with the aftermath of being publicly outed like that.
Did you go looking for that juvenile delinquent?
That was always something that we thought about doing.
Because they would still be around, likely.
They would, but all of their rights are protected. There's no names, nothing like that. So being
hard to
them,
find.
Right,
Yeah.
them being a victim, their rights are protected. So
harder than Winnebago Man to find. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
This
instance has always been a question mark. We've only been able to go off of the newspaper reports, but we looked into it more and weren't able to find any records about the actual instance.
So it sounds like some people were behind setting that up because obviously they wanted to get this guy. They wanted to get Bruce for something.
Yeah.
If you've got magic dust that's, on somebody.
Yeah.
That's a horrible thing.
It is. And, it's tough to be different in a place where, everything is supposed to be one way. And that is what Oklahoma is at some times. It's a very conservative place. And, he was there during the McCarthy era, which, they were tracking down people that were homosexuals because they thought they were communists, or terrible people and deserved to be in jail. So it was a tough time for Goff during that era.
So what was his next move?
So he moved to Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and lived in the Price Tower, which was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright.
Right. Beautiful building.
Beautiful building. And he actually officed and lived out of there.
And for the rest of his career?
No, for a good amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And then moved to Kansas City and then Tyler, Texas. Yeah.
So what buildings was he most well known for in his career?
So unfortunately, both of them have been destroyed, but the Babinger House in Norman, Oklahoma, which is a logarithmic spiral, and then the Shinnecoin, which was also in Bartlesville, Oklahoma.
That's a house?
It was a house, yeah.
It's gone?
It is gone. It was burned down.
Oh.
Yeah, by arson.
Wow.
Supposedly, yeah. The whole life and story of Goff and his designs is a mystery, and lots of instances like this have occurred. So that's.
Now, when did it burn down?
I believed it burned down in 1999.
Okay.
Yeah.
So probably not the same people that set him up in 1955.
Correct.
With the magic dust.
It was probably a different situation. There's been a lot of rumors about who did it. Some people say it was the land developer. People say it was just someone in town. So again, another question mark to the story of Goff.
How did you go about tracking down Goff's students?
That is a great question. So I first read David DeLong's book front to back, just trying to figure out all of the characters in his story. And then I was actually at the University of Oklahoma at the time, so I had connections through there, and they would kind of lead me to potential students that knew of other students. So it was just kind of this hide-and-go-seek game where I was just trying to find all of these people around the country that had no kind of contact information. And then it was a lot of, I met this one person, and then they led me to another student. So it was
they all keep in touch with each other, I imagine.
Yeah. The Goff followers, they have their own little group, and they stay close, and it's a great connection and community of people.
Is there a website for the film?
There is. It's goffdocumentary.com.
Goffdocumentary.com.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have plans for release so that people can buy a copy of this for themselves?
Yeah. So since today, I can't believe it's today, is our world premiere, we're going to be doing the festival route for the next year or so. But once that is kind of simmered down, we're hoping to release it to DVD and then get some distribution. So hopefully it'll be on TV for you all to watch.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for coming to talk with me, Britni.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Angela Roll, your special real estate agent for modernist houses, and by Nichiha.com/US Modernist. Visit usmodernist.org's massive modernist archives to hear past shows, discover 7,000 mid-century houses, and access 2.7 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. Contact George at george@usmodernist.org or on Instagram at Mr.Modernism. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. You'll never meet guest researcher Cindy Stratton.
Not her real name.
As she's moved to an even more secret underground hideaway with its own cloaking device.
Yes.
U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another breathlessly cinematic, woefully underfunded, Why Is My Popcorn Orange edition of U.S. Modernist Radio.